Oh my goodness. Hello. Welcome to my first ever Booktube video. So, my name is Kate, and I am a copywriter working in advertising and also a big reader. And I've been following so many amazing creators online for so long and thought I would throw my hat in the ring. So, for my first ever video, I recently just moved. I live in Chicago, and now I finally have an office of my own with my own little book setup. But I'm going to be talking through all of the books that I read in the month of June. So I am one of those people who very much suffers from seasonal depression, but unlike so many, my seasonal depression hits me in the summer. I really do not like the heat. I'm much more of a spooky, cozy season kind of gal. Big horror fan also. So this month, I tried to prioritize reading books that elicited that kind of feeling because I'm just struggling with the 90-degree days. It was 97 degrees the day that we moved into my new apartment. And it's been tough. So it's more or less been a month of summer ween picks, if you will. Um, and so we're just going to go through all of the books that I read and what I rated them. First up, we have The Girl with a Thousand Faces by Sunyi Dean. And this was the book that my in person book club chose for the month of June. We're going to be talking about it in mid July. And it's a gothic historical fantasy novel set in Hong Kong, blending ghost stories, World War II history, and trauma. Following Mercy Chan, a ghost talker in the Kowloon walled city who helps spirits find peace while uncovering her own lost memories through dual timelines and a unique narrative structure. So it's set in Kowloon walled city, and it was a real city that's described as an ungoverned, densely populated enclave in British Hong Kong. Once a Chinese military fort, it became a legal gray area. So it ended up becoming one of the most densely populated cities in history and was kind of this no man's land for like as far as government. And so this historical context is really the backdrop for The Girl with a Thousand Faces, which I thought was really a valuable component because it's a piece of history that I don't really know anything about. So you're dealing kind of with these forces of occupation, um, Japan occupying Hong Kong and then giving it back to Great Britain and kind of the warring countries there. And we have just a lot of themes of like historical or inherited trauma, rather, and how trauma gets handed down from person to person, kind of told through the lens of these Chinese folk stories. Um, and I thought that that was really interesting. I feel like I've read some like Irish folk stories or, kind of more English in the English Western canon, and don't have a ton of exposure to the different like types of stories in other countries. So I thought that that was really interesting. As far as the writing goes, I did struggle to connect with it just a little bit. I think it. I generally am not the biggest fan of like a dual timeline or a dual perspective. I think I had the same problem with Japanese Gothic that I read earlier this year by Kylie Lee Baker, and it just makes it more difficult for me to really connect with anything that's going on. And I found that that was kind of a flaw for me personally. I don't think he was executed poorly, but I just think there's a point in the novel where all of a sudden you're put back in time, and you're experiencing the main character's childhood in a much more comprehensive way. And though I think that that's important, I felt like it as a device to kind of reveal to us the mystery at the core of the story. Just it felt a little bit just heavy handed ultimately. um the kind of framework of it is that the the main character is being haunted by this the girl with 1,000 faces, this ghost. um and there's this kind of like mysterious series of deaths that don't make a lot of sense, and I kind of wish it had leaned more into that mystery aspect. um but I mean, ultimately I think the storytelling was pretty solid. I loved the setting. The characters were interesting. I think that the kind of like mythological aspect was really fun. So I think I would give this like a 4 or 3.75. I'm really excited to talk to my book club about it because everybody always has really interesting insights. But yeah, so that was one of the first books that I read. All right, another book that I read in the month of June is The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. And I had seen so much buzz about this book on the internet. And so it's been on my radar since it came out. It's blur or on the front. There's a quote from Tasha Swery, who wrote a trilogy that I really enjoyed. It's described as fiendishly charming and clever. So the plot of this one, just looking at the synopsis here. Um, Let us fly now to the empire of Oran, where after 24 years of peace, the reign of Bursun the Brusque has come to an end. In the dizzying heat of midsummer, 7 exceptional warriors, thinkers, and strategists compete to replace him. When one of them is murdered, it falls to Nima Kra, the Emperor's brilliant, idiosyncratic high scholar, to find the killer and fight for the throne. Nima believes she is alone, but we are here to help. All she has to do is let us in. If she succeeds, we will win an empire. If she fails, death awaits her. But we won't let that happen. We are the Raven, and we are magnificent. Um, so this is really interesting. It definitely plays with the narrative structure. You have um, Nima's perspective, and then also the Raven as part of like this, as part of like this godlike entity of 8. And it's set during this competition for the throne to usurp, or for who will take over as the emperor. And I think that the competition aspect was a little bit muddied by also the fact that there's this investigation going on, um, and there's also this kind of mystical saving the world component. And I think it felt like it was very readable, but at the same time I felt like it just spread itself a little bit too thin for me personally. I really prefer, I mean, it's meaty. There's no mistaking that. It is not a short book. But it just, I don't know, it lacked what I wanted it to give. And I also think, I've seen some people criticize Nima. I believe she's supposed to be in her 30s, which I love reading a female main character who's in their 30s. But she did feel very young. It's definitely plot heavy, and it lacked a kind of introspection that I personally am drawn to. It's a little bit more dry. Her humor is a little bit more like bare bones, not super flowery, I would say. Um, I wanted to like it a lot more than I think that I did, especially given how big it is. Will I read the next one? I don't know. I think I gave this a 3. Um, it definitely broke up some of the other books that I was reading. So at least there's that. So moving on, I also completed the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And fun fact is that I completed my 200-hour yoga teacher training last year, and so now I teach yoga once a week, and really wanted to continue my education into the philosophy. And so I read right here this version, which has commentary by Sri Swami. I'm not gonna pronounce his last name because I don't want to offend him. But there was a lot in here that I thought was really valuable. It goes through the eight limbs of yoga, the yamas and the niyamas, if you're familiar with those. And so it's a lot about just like the way that you live your life. This idea that you are not your thoughts, you're not your body, you're the person who witnesses them. And so it creates this kind of separation between your ruminating thoughts and the self. And so you can always kind of pull back from the chaos in the world around you to be rooted in that deeper self. I think it'd be worth a reread. I think there's some it was very much a take what resonates and leave the rest. Um I'm still kind of digesting how I want to incorporate this into my own life. But I loved a lot of kind of the notes about selflessness and service. I personally am not religious, but I can appreciate uh, a philosophical take on how we live our lives. I always think that that's very interesting. And as I get older, I find myself kind of constantly reshaping or rethinking that kind of thing. So yeah, so I read that. Um, and then next, I listened to the audiobook version of one of the hottest horror novels that's come out recently, and that's The Caretaker by Marcus Cleaver. And I had also listened to the audiobook of his other book. Here's the description for The Caretaker. Exciting opportunity. Caretaker urgently needed. 3 days of work, competitive pay, serious applicants only. Maisie Mullins can't say why the job posting grabbed her attention. It had the pull of a fisherman's lure. Barb took an all, vaguely ominous. But after an endless string of failed job interviews, she's not exactly in the position to be picky. She has rent to pay, groceries to buy, and a younger sister to provide for. Besides, it's only 3 days' work. 3 days, cooped up in a stranger's house, surrounded by Oregon coast wilderness. What starts as a peculiar side gig soon becomes a waking nightmare. An incomprehensible evil may dwell on this property, and Macy Mullins might just be the only thing standing between it and the rest of humanity. The other book by him that I did read was We Used to Live Here. And there are, a lot of people whose taste that I generally share who loved this. And I hate to say that it just really didn't work for me. I wasn't wowed by um, the diction or the syntax, like the prose itself. And I didn't I wasn't all that invested in what was going on. There wasn't really anything that was all that scary. I think that he did in the plot something similar to what Mark Z. Danielewski does in The Leaves, or House of Leaves, where the house on the inside is kind of different from the outside, or there's like kind of an amorphous quality to it. And I think it was pulled in too many directions. Anyway, so I was not a fan of that. But this last month I read The Caretaker, and I had not a dissimilar experience. I just didn't care at the end of the day. I found the main character's sister to be very annoying, and I found the main character to be kind of flat. The owner of the house, the woman who survives her husband, um, just kind of disappears. So I had some questions there. She's just like all of a sudden gone. Um, I don't know. I think his writing just isn't for me. It was like a pretty easy listen. I don't think it's hard hitting content. for me, again, everybody has their own take on this. I don't have that much to say about it, and that's a real bummer. And the next book that I read is A Good Person by Kirsten King. And this was on my radar because Frankie from Frankie's Bookshelf, I think is his handle on YouTube, read both this and Heap Earth Upon It, both of which have the same cover art. And so A Good Person is described as Lillian and Henry have been enjoying each other's company, especially in bed. Even though Lillian's best friend calls it situationship, Lillian is determined to lock Henry down, and she has a plan. She'll be the best, most accommodating version of herself until he falls in love with her. But when Harry blindsides Lillian with a breakup, Lillian exacts revenge by performing a drunken hex on him. Lillian expects Henry to come crawling back to her. What she doesn't quite anticipate is becoming a prime suspect in his murder case when he's found dead. As Lillian grapples with the loss of her sort of boyfriend, she's hit with another reckoning that Henry had a long term girlfriend he also left behind. Desperate to control the narrative, clear her name, and assume her rightful place as Henry's mourning girlfriend, Lillian's pursuit of the truth will throw her into a dangerous tailspin. So, this one was interesting. I remember the descriptions of the main character grappling with her rejection very evocative. I was very uncomfortable. I was experiencing a lot of secondhand embarrassment. I feel like I'm very susceptible to cringe, and I felt a lot of that. It's a real insight into the minds of people who just won't let it go, don't know when to call it quits, cut their losses. I think one thing, this is just a personal thing. One thing I found in this kind of like female rage, support women's rights and women's wrongs kind of subgenre, is that the men are always drinking whiskey. They're always whiskey men, and it's always just such like a. And I do think that it's realistic in that like it's not specific to a certain kind of whiskey, or if it's scotch or based on the region, but it's just like this like shorthand for this guy's a douchebag. um and I just thought that that was kind of funny, but like some of that, it feels very internet lore heavy. Like it feels like a book written for the perpetually online. I thought the prose was fine. I feel like I just am kind of tired of, in some ways, like this female rage, unhinged character. I think I am very pro nuance. Um, and there just wasn't that much here for me. She just seems to be very unwell and very upset and obsessive. It's topical. I just wish that she had dived a little bit deeper into that with some of the themes. Um, yeah, I don't know. I thought it was okay. I believe that there's an element too where one of the characters writes an article for like it's like Teen Vogue or something, and like I found that to be really uncomfortable. It's like a tell-all kind of situation, and the writing's just bad. Um, yeah, I don't know. I was very underwhelmed by that one. Um, so unfortunately, at this point in the month, it's really kind of 50-50. Um, I think I ended up giving that one a 3. But one that I did really enjoy is Hungerstone by Kat Dunn? Yes, by Kat Dunn. And I'd obviously heard lots about this. A lot of the people whose opinions I tend to share have talked about this book. So it's been on my radar, and it finally came through on Libby. So I listened to the audiobook for this one as well. And it follows Lenore, the wife of steel magnate. Magnate? Yeah. Henry, but 10 years into their marriage, the relationship has soured and no child has arrived to fill the distance growing between them. Henry's ambitions take them out of London and to the imposing Nethershire manor in the countryside, where Henry aims to host a hunt with society's finest. Lenore keeps a terrible secret from the last time her husband hunted, and though they never speak of it, it haunts their marriage to this day. The preparations for the event take a turn when a carriage accident near their remote home brings the mysterious Carmilla into Lenore's life. Carmilla, who is weak and pale during the day but vibrant at night. Carmilla, who stirs up a hunger deep within Lenore. Soon, girls from local villages begin to fall sick before being consumed by a bloody hunger. Torn between regaining her husband's affection and Carmilla's ever growing presence, Lenore begins to unravel her past and, in doing so, uncovers a darkness in her household that will place her at terrible risk. So obviously this is inspired by Carmilla, which was which preceded Dracula, which I think is a fun fact. It's by J. Sheridan Le Fanu, and has a lot of themes about around homophobia and consumption and desire, as vampire stories often do. And so I thought that the storyline in Hungerstone was well done. It was fun. The writing was, it felt like the prose was appropriate for the setting. Um and I really liked the characters. I thought Carmilla, though she's just kind of lurking throughout the story. Like she's always there, and you always kind of feel her gnawing presence. And so I thought that that was really effective as a tool. Um, and we got to see these kind of glimpses also of Henry being sweet, um, to Lenore, and like, again, examples of their relationship when it wasn't soured prior to when things went awry. And so that felt very realistic and therefore satisfying when the end comes around. I personally, I'm a big fan. I love reading queer fiction. I love diversity in my novels. I feel like the prose just really resonates with me, as a bisexual woman. Also, I like seeing that represented in the complication, or like complexities and nuances of gender and sexuality, and especially in centuries past. So, Rotten Heart, which will be coming out in 2026, is inspired by Hamlet, which will be really fun. And I majored in English. I'm sure I read Hamlet. Do I remember it? No. I'm not the biggest Shakespeare head. I actually resent the fact that Shakespeare is a requirement for the English degree. Might be a hot take. I don't know. But next up, I have a book that is hiding. Here we go. I talked next. I talked about this ad nauseum on my TikTok, and that is Shy Girl by Mia Ballard. I honestly would be happy not to talk about this book again. This is about Gia, who is in dire straits financially, and so signs up for a sugar dating website and is introduced to a man who wants to pay her to pretend to be a dog. And she agrees, and things spiral from there. And if you don't know about the controversy around this, it was originally independently published, picked up by a traditional publisher, and then pulled from print for suspected use of AI. So I had to go on eBay to find this copy. And the biggest the first indicator to me, other than just like the atrocious writing, is the formatting. There are just these egregious formatting mistakes where like whole or half pages are empty, um, clearly not intentionally. Um, the punctuation is inconsistent, so like obviously it's not a surprise to hear that it was written by AI. Um, I do think that it's interesting, and what I talked about on TikTok is the reason why it got picked up by a publisher in the first place. And I think that that speaks to a broader marketability to this female rage subgenre. I think, if you think from the perspective of an editor at a publishing house, you see this book that's subversive and violent and has a good for her kind of storyline. And I think, you look at that on paper and you see money signs. And that's part of the problem, is like we're pumping out so many books within these subgenres because they take off. These different niches and tropes become so popular, and all of a sudden people are like, oh, recommend me a book with this like hyper specific enemies to lovers, but they're forced to sleep in the same bed, and um, both of their mothers died on the 3rd of June, and like just writing it's been but writing and publishing has become this interesting feedback loop where books will be published and then audiences grab onto things and ultimately kind of end up requesting specific plot lines. I mean, you think too about the whole debacle with God, I forget his name, who wrote The Age of Scorpius, and the writing just ended up being absolutely terrible. um Let me look it up. Milo Winter. Yeah. So this has been covered extensively elsewhere, but I think it's indicative also of the kind of like pump it out style of publishing where, you know, it- corners are getting cut in regards to editing, and you're writing to these tropes, writing to, the zodiac signs, or, these kind of pulpy trends. And I think that, that there's an inevitability to that, just given the state of capitalism and social media that we're in right now, and the fact that we, people, authors are in Goodreads comments responding to people's reviews and shit like that. So I mean, I think the book itself is bad. I don't know. The writing's good, not good. The editing is absent. By the end, I don't know. I took extensive notes on this. Maybe I'll do a full deep dive in a separate video, because there's somehow both a lot and nothing at all. Um, but with that, I do want to get into my next read, which was Wretch, or The Unbecoming of Porcelain Ka by Eric LaRocca. Now, this was my first book by him that I had ever read. I know that his books tend to be hit or miss, or his stories tend to be hit or miss with a lot of people. But to be honest with you, I love the cover. The cover of this is incredible, and so I decided to pick it up. I think I got it on a day that there was a sale at Barnes Noble. But the description for this is: after his husband dies, Simeon Link finds himself overcome by grief and seeking comfort in an unusual support group called the Wretches, who offer an addictive and dangerous source of relief. They introduce Simeon to a curious figure known as Porcelain Ka, a man with the ability to let those who are grieving have one last intimate moment with their beloved for a price. Hallucinatory, fiendish, and destructively beautiful, Wretch transports us to a world where not everything is as it seems, and those we may love may be the ones who haunt us most. And I did really like this idea that he plays with, of like a reverse haunting, where the living is continually seeking out something that is no longer there, or that maybe wants to let go or be let go of. Um, and I think a lot of the imagery in this was really evocative. There's a use of insects, which is interesting, and a lot of mystery and ambiguity. And I just was kind of on the edge of my seat the whole time, and also not taken out of it for the prose. Um, I feel like that's happened to me quite a bit lately, where I'm reading something and I'm like, the sentence structure of this is just really taking me out. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think I gave it a 4 or 4.5. Um, and I would definitely read more from him, and would be excited to. So that was that. And then I read Root Rot, which has also been on my list, because of people that I follow on the internet. This is by Saskia Nislow. And this is the description for this is: come meet the liar, the secret keeper, the crybaby, and the rest. 9 children travel with their families to their grandfather's vacation property, where strange things begin to happen. Eyes blink from the bottom up, mushrooms ooze blood, people's faces don't hang right anymore, except they do once you look more closely. Transformations warp the children's sense of time and place, the very land itself seeming to encroach upon them. As the liar watches the children succumb one by one to an unknown fate, she must make sense of absent stars in the night sky, vials of amber liquid that taste of milk, a funny little rope tied in knots. She's faced with a choice: join or resist. Only the choice is not so simple. It's actually interesting reading this description, because if I was asked to describe this, I don't think I could. Very weird. Lots of mushrooms, lots of weird cousins, um, weird family dynamics. It's short and sweet, and the prose is beautiful. And most of the time, I had no idea what was going on, and after the fact, I still don't really know what went on. And yet, I enjoyed every minute of it. I do tend to like books that are big and confusing, um, and unclear. And yeah, so I enjoyed that for sure. Um, and then last but not least, I read my first ever Johanna Van Veen, book, Bone of My Bone. And I've wanted to read her books, um, for quite some time. I knew that this was a new release. I love the sprayed edges. And so I picked this one up, and this is the description. So the year is 1635. Sister Ursula, a young nun fleeing the ruins of her convent, and Elsbeth, a sharp witted peasant, escape a band of marauding soldiers and disappear into the Bavarian forest. War scorches the land, and no one survives it alone. Amid the devastation, they find something in the arms of a dying man. There's a typo on Goodreads. The gilded skull of a saint. It is said that if you reunite the saint's skull with her body, a wish will be granted. Desperate for salvation, and each with secret desires of their own, Ursula and Elsbeth follow a ragged map across the blighted countryside. So basically, they're in pursuit of returning this skull to, to its body. Um, and there's death, and there's plague, and there's some sexual tension, and um, grief and guilt and complicated emotions. Um, I will say that this one, I'm not sure if it really worked for me. I think that the kind of religious context of it, again, as someone who's agnostic, um, just doesn't really resonate with me in any kind of way. Like a runaway nun is kind of, I don't know. And I think the time period it's so grimy and bleak. And I like bleak and I like grimy, but I don't know if I like it when it's the plague. Like, for example, I read, it's over on my other bookshelf, but Between Two Fires by Christopher Buhlman, a couple months ago. And that's a similar kind of like religious grappling, old timey setting book, that I similarly am not sure I enjoyed. Um, so I do think, um, I think Blood on Her Tongue is the other one by her, and would be one that I would read, because I liked the writing. Yeah, I don't know. It just like all the romance happened really quickly. It just like ramped up really fast. And then again, the setting and the context, I just didn't wasn't all that interested in, unfortunately. So I think I would probably give that a three. Um, yeah. So yeah, that was my month of June for reading. Like I said, I moved into a new apartment on July 1st. So I am kind of in a little bit of a limbo as far as what I'm going to read next. I did just read, where did it go? Oh, Headlights by CJ Lead, and I had a blast. Hopefully, I'll be able to talk about that in a July wrap up later on. But I have not read Mayfly, but immediately went and picked that up because I enjoyed Headlights so much. But yeah, now I'm just like not really sure what my vibe is. I feel like I'm discombobulated from establishing a new routine. Um, it's still hot. It's raining a lot. Um, I don't know if I want to read fantasy or more horror. It's really tough to say, but I will be back again to talk about other books that I'm reading or have read. Um, and so, if you're watching this, thank you for spending a little bit of time with me. And yeah, that's it.